On the review, a couple of things. The first section starts, the quiz starts also with, by the way, this is not the right assignment. Okay. The quiz starts with factoring and solving by factoring. That's the first 5-point standard. Please make note that if you are a very slow factorer, I know some of you really struggle with factoring, right? Come back to that section at the end of the quiz. I'd rather put a 1 in for that section and have you come in some night and retake that section than to not finish 2 or 3 of the other sections. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you're a slow factorer, feel free to leave that for later. The other thing I want to talk about on this section is that there is a difference between factor and on that same section are, whoops, just kidding, are the questions that say solve. The difference is when it is set equal to 0, you can actually solve. When it is not set equal to 0, all you can do is give me the factors. You can't solve. Let me give you an example of that. Somebody pick 1 or 2. Which one do you want to do? All right, let's do 2. On 2, you can take something out. They're all even, so I know I can take out a 2. I think I can maybe take out a 4. Can anybody check? Okay, they're all divisible by 4, so we get a 3n squared. I think that's 19 and 30. All right, so then we leave the 4 out front. Don't lose it. And the way this goes is the first term here will have to be factored into the first term in each parenthesis. We're fortunate there's only one way to make 3. It's 3 and 1. So we have a 3n and a 1n. Or just n, it doesn't matter. The number at the back, unfortunately, has more factors, but it is going to have to be factored into the number at the back here. So we could have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. Somebody take a pick. 3 and 10. We don't want to put a 3 in here because there's already a 3 and it'd have a common factor. So we'd have to put a 3 here and a 10 here. Now, to get a positive 30, we need 2 positives or 2 negatives, right? To multiply together. If they're going to add up to a negative, I'm thinking we would need them both to be negative. So then we can do our little inside-outside to see if it makes this middle term. 3n times a negative 3 is a negative 9n, and a negative 10 times 1 is a negative 10n, which does in fact make negative 19 in the middle, okay? Corbin was making sure, or somebody, I don't remember who yelled, but that we got it right the first time so we didn't have to sit here for a while and keep trying. But does that help some of you who are kind of like, I kind of forgot how to factor? First in each parenthesis comes from the first term. Last in each parenthesis comes from the last term. And then to get the middle, you got to do the inside-outside business to add up to that middle number. All right, this is the factoring pattern that we've practiced over and over and over. You take the cube root of each, which is a 2 and an x, and a 3, and we keep the same sign in the middle. I did that kind of fast. Is everybody okay on that first one? Then the second parenthesis is where we fall apart sometimes. This term gets squared, and this term gets squared. Be careful, 2x times 2x is 4x squared, and 3 squared is 9. Then does anybody remember what goes in the middle?
Multiply 2x and 3.
Yes, 2x times 3 would be a 6x. Everybody okay where that came from? And then if you want to use my hint of soap, it's the same sign we started with goes in this parenthesis. These stayed plus. The opposite sign, and this last one's always positive. So like if you were doing number 4, it would have a minus and then a plus on that one. But that soap only works when you're doing these cubic things, okay? So don't get confused. and use it anywhere else. Questions? Is that enough factoring? Except I will do one of the factoring and solving questions. You want me to do 5 or 6?
5.
Okay. If we were doing 6, I'm okay with doing 5, but if we were doing 6, the first step would be, yeah, it's got to equal 0, okay? We could do this one though because it does have more factors to worry about, right? 9 could be 9 and 1 or 3 and 3. What do you want to try?
3 and 3.
And 4 at the back could be 2 and 2 or 4 and 1.
4 and 1.
All right, I'm listening to him. What are the signs?
Both negative.
So we'd have a negative 12p and a negative 3p would be negative 15. So I think it is factored correctly. I would have tried 2 and 2 first and wouldn't have worked. Are we done? Solve means now because it's equal to 0, either this factor equals 0 or this factor equals 0. So we'd have 3p equals 4, divide by 3 is 4/3. 3p equals 1, divide by 3, and we get 1/3. Why could I solve that one? Because it was equal to 0. But the directions will say that, okay? Big letters, underlined, bold, caps, solve. The other section will say factor, okay? All right. Solve by square rooting. Let's do number 8. Read directions, okay? It says solve by taking a square root. So that's your hint that you don't want to FOIL all this out and do a bunch of extra stuff. Do you remember what we do? What do we want to do first? Subtract 8 to isolate, or we're working on isolating the squared quantity. Then what? Divide the 2 off each side. So now we have the squared quantity is equal to 7. What happens now that loses points? Yeah, don't forget when we square root anything with an x or a variable, we need to remember somewhere a plus or minus. We usually put it on the side with the number because we don't want to deal with absolute value, blah, 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 blah. And then we lastly need to add the 1 over here. Now, does this become a square root of 8? Does it become plus or minus 1 times the square root of 7? No, it's added. So we have a positive 1 plus or minus the square root of 7. Everybody okay? Completing the square. We can do both of these if we need to. Do you remember how this goes, or?
Yes.
This one is set up nicely so that we could just add a blank to each side. If we were doing this one over here, we would have to, yep, add the 11 over to the other side and then add the blank to each side. Yep, we can do 10. Okay, the rule is we do,
divided by 2.
yep, half or divide by 2 to get that. So we'd have an x. Make sure you keep the sign, by the way. This one would be an n minus 8. This one is an x plus 6. Okay, keep the sign. And then, guys, the whole point of this is that you just wrote a perfect square. X plus 6 times x plus 6. If I FOILed that all out, you don't need to write this out, but it would be x squared plus 12x plus 36. So this is equivalent to what it needs to be equivalent to what's above it. So therefore, in this blank needs to go the square of that, which is 36. Okay, we just made it factored form. X squared plus 12x plus 36 factors as x plus 6 times x plus 6. And then the golden rule of algebra, whatever we did to the left, we got to do to the right. 47, which doesn't have a nice square root. So we get plus or minus the square root of 47. Nothing goes in there. And we subtract the 6. Can I just make up a quick, this is nothing to do with anything, but if it said n plus 2 equals plus or minus 4 square roots of 5 at some point, when you subtract this 2 over there, does it combine with something? No, you would just have a negative 2 and then that plus or minus 4 square roots of 5, right? Okay, just so we're careful on that. That was just an aside. All right, then the next section on the quiz, just so you know what the order is going to be on the quiz, is actually this complex number section. So I'm jumping around a little bit. Do you need me to do any of these? This is just foiling, distributing a negative and collecting like terms. Be careful if it looks like this on the quiz. You got to remember to distribute the negative, right? And those parentheses are not asking you to FOIL this together. You'd end up with a 1 minus 2i. That was just an example I made up, okay? What you do have to watch for on ones like this and beyond is anytime you see an I squared, you have to replace it with a what? Negative 1. Okay, so can I skip the rest of these and go to the icky one? All right, this is icky. I agree. You cannot have an I in the denominator. So to get rid of it, we are going to rationalize or multiply top and bottom by the conjugate of the denominator. The denominator is in a plus bi form, and the conjugate of that is a minus bi. The only thing that changes is that middle sign. Now, I have a question for you. I can do this ugly one, or I can make up one that's a little more like on the quiz, and I could leave you this one to try on your own. Anybody care? Okay, you want me to do the one like the quiz? The one like the quiz, it could be equally disgusting on the top. Let's see, negative 12 plus 5i. Okay, that's nice and disgusting. But the denominator of the one on the quiz, I made a little bit nicer so that, like, what would the conjugate of this be right now? Negative 9 minus 2i. Ooh, I wrote that tiny. And you'd have to do that. That's a lot of negatives, right? The one on the quiz is more like maybe 2 minus I. So then its conjugate is going to be what? Just a plain old 2 plus I. Does everybody see what I'm saying as far as I made it a little bit less cumbersome with all these negatives that you're going to have to deal with up at this one? You'd have to FOIL that all together. Let's do the one I wrote instead. Okay. Negative 12 times 2. You're multiplying. On all these FOIL steps, you're multiplying. Negative 12 times 2. Use your calculator if you're not good at signs. Then negative 12 times I. Then 5i times 2i. Those are both positive. And be careful, 5i times an I back here would be a plus 5i squared. Okay, the denominator, 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times I is a positive 2i. Now, if you did the denominator correctly, the middle term now should drop out. When I do a negative I times 2, I get a negative 2i. And then a negative I times a positive I is a negative 1I squared. Everybody good? And we got to remember that all I squareds become negative 1s. So if you have a 5I squared, it becomes 5 times negative 1, which is negative 5. Everybody okay? So this back here becomes a negative 5, and the one on the bottom becomes minus negative 1 or plus 1. I didn't bother to rewrite it, but now we're going to take that whole top and collect all the like terms. Ugh. Negative 24 and negative 5 is negative 29, right? And then in the middle, we have a negative 12i plus 10i, which would be a negative 2i. Remember, if you did it right, these should go away in the denominator, and you should end up with a real number. I have a 4 plus 1, which is a 5. You can leave it or separate it, either one. Questions? Can I just make one extra? If it had ended like this, what can you do there? How? Okay, you could take a 2 out of all of them, or you could actually separate them. And you'd end up with, what, 9 minus 7 halves I or something? But just be careful. Don't do this goes in here 9 times, so I have 9 minus 14i. Nobody's going to do that, right? You can only if it's can go into everything. Okay. Just reviewing that. Oh, powers of I. The good news is, if you can't figure out the power of I, you can still get a 4 out of 5, okay? I'm not going to count this as a separate concept because it's just not that important, but I did put one on there. I squared becomes negative 1, and a negative 1 to any odd power becomes what? Negative 1, and negative 1 to any even power is plain old 1. Those are basically the rules we're going to have here. We're going to divide by 2. I squared, if we divide this by 2, we get 1, 1, 1. And what is I squared? Negative 1 to the 111th. You could type it in your calculator. I'm not going to take your calculator away, but it would give you negative 1. What do we do when it's odd, though, an odd power? Yeah, we take 1 and knock it out front. And now we still have 166 to worry about. Then we divide it by 2. What's that going to become?
Negative 1.
To the odd power will be negative 1, but it's still multiplied by an I, so you can write negative 1i or negative I. How we doing? You okay on powers of I? Okay, the next section of the quiz is the quadratic section. So if I go back up here, I think it actually starts by asking you about the discriminant. So the discriminant, does anybody remember the formula? Yeah.
B squared minus 4 AC.
Okay. And I usually write it with parentheses here, but you don't have to. It's not required. All right. And the idea, let's just make some notes over here, is if that discriminant turns out equal to 0, there's only one real solution. If that discriminant is positive, okay, then there'd be 2 real solutions. If that discriminant is less than 0 or negative, there would be no real or 2 complex solutions. Now, that comes from quadratic formula. If you do negative b plus or minus the square root of 0, you're only going to get one answer. If you do negative b plus or minus the square root of 7 or something, you're going to get two answers, a positive square root of 7 and a negative square root of 7. If you get a negative underneath the radical, you're going to get an imaginary or non-real solution. This business in blue is written on the quiz. Your choices are 1 real, 2 real, or no real and 2 complex, okay? But I don't tell you which one is which. You got to know that part. All right, I didn't put one on there like 14. I don't know why it's on the quiz review this way, but this, okay, first of all, let's pretend that's an X, not an A, because it's kind of confusing. But remember how it goes, A would be 9, but how many B's are there here?
0.
Right. B would be 0 and C would be 2. So you'd have 0 squared minus 4 times 9 times 2, which is negative 72. So you'd have no real 2 complex.
You have to put in no real or put 2 complex.
You can just put 2 complex. It's written on the directions what to do. So, do you need me to do the other one or not? I think this one comes out positive when you do b squared minus 4ac. B squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 6. 148. Okay, then you have to do the actual quadratic formula questions. So that's backwards, right? On your, did it come before that on yours?
No.
Okay.
No,
It's the number 11 anyway, right? Starts with number 11. Okay, state the quadratic formula for me. Everybody's going to get that part right? You have to be able to write it, and then you have to be able to do it. All right, would you like me to do 11, 12, or 13? 13? Okay, 13 is looking disgusting. What's the first thing you have to do? Yeah, you can just add 8 so that it's equal to 0, and you'd have a negative 3x squared minus 12x minus 8 equals 0. Could I change all of the signs? Which would mean I'm going to multiply both sides by a negative 1. Yeah, if you wanted to deal with positives and not negatives, I'll leave it the way it is because I'm thinking that's how most of you would have done it, but you could have definitely made it all positive, which would just mean you added everything over to that side and left a 0 on this side. Okay. So A is negative 3, B is negative 12, and C is negative 8. Gross. All right, the opposite of B would be 12 plus or minus the square root of. Now, when you square that, it's going to become positive, right? So if you're going to type it in your calculator, you got to put it in parentheses. Could I just do plain old 12 squared on my calculator?
Yeah.
Because it's going to become positive, right? I can't leave off the parentheses if I'm going to type it as a negative. But do you understand that if it's going to become positive anyway, you could just, I usually just type 12 squared because it doesn't matter, okay? And then it's minus, that's a minus, not a negative, 4 times A, which is negative 3, times C, which is negative 8. I'm just trying to remind you, it's a different key on your calculator, the minus and the negative. It's going to be 144 minus 56. Is it 80 something?
I got 48.
Okay. That's because I can't multiply 20. This is 12 times 8. Yeah, that's not, I don't know what I said, but I was wrong. It's 48. Oh, I also forgot it was supposed to be over 2a. Boy, I'm losing it up here. 2 times negative 3 is the denominator, right? Okay. So 12 plus or minus, you said it's a positive 48 though, right?
Yeah.
Over negative 6. Can I reduce the 12 and the negative 6?
No.
No. I can reduce 48. What goes into 48?
Numbers.
Yeah. 16 is the easiest or the fastest way to get there because it's 16 times 3. So we'll have a 12 plus or minus the square root of 16 is 4, and we have a square root of 3. Now, can I just cross out the 6 and the 12?
No.
I got to reduce everything. Thank you, it was negative, yep. If you want to leave it like this, where it's all one fraction, you have to reduce by 2 all of the things that are not in the jail. So we'd end up reduced by a 2, Hoffbauer. Reduced by a 2, let me try that again. Would be a 6 plus or minus 2 square roots of 3 over negative 3. By the way, that is the same as this. Okay? Because if you changed all the signs top and bottom, changing a plus or minus doesn't do anything. So if we had made this a positive, 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 it would have turned out looking like this, because the opposite of B would have been negative instead. These are equivalent. That's my job to know what's equivalent, okay? It also would have been okay if you had separated this. 6 over negative 3 plus or minus 2 over negative 3 square roots of 3 would have been negative 2 plus or minus, and you can say it's negative 2 square roots of 3 over 3 or positive, doesn't matter because of the plus or minus. That's just gross.
What if you like did that, but also like 2 separate answers, but then switch the plus or minus? That'd just be annoying.
Yeah, you could definitely write it out. I know some teachers do make you write it out, don't they? Like, here's the one with the plus, here's the one with the minus.
Really?
Ugh. I mean, yes. It's not that ugly on the quiz. It's not as ugly as the one I just did. But I did want to review, what if it turned out to be 15 plus or minus the square root of negative 25 all over 10? What if, yes. Yes, this would simplify to a 5i. Is everybody good? Square root of negative 1, square root of 25 is a 5 times an I. So you'd have 15 plus or minus 5i. If it was over 10, you could reduce all those by 5, and you'd get 3 plus or minus I all over 2. Or 3 halves plus or minus 1 half I, or... Yes? No? We good? Do you need to do another quadratic, or we're okay? That leaves the review section to go over.
Yeah.
3 forms of a line. I don't think you have to state them this time. Slope intercept is mx plus b. This is the one I worry about the most. And this is the one I always start with. And then the other one is this. Now, can I give you a hint? The only question that says standard form is something like this. It says y minus 3 equals, I don't know, 2/5 x plus 4, we'll say. And it says change this to standard form. That's the only question that talks about standard form. You don't have to actually like start at the beginning of one for standard form. You just have to change this to standard form. So what would that look like? Y minus 3 equals 2/5 x plus, this is a 4 over 1, so 2 times 4 is 8. 5 times 1 is 5, okay.
Add 3.
You could add 3, is that what you want to do, guys? Or do you want to multiply through by the 5 now and get rid of the fractions? Does not matter. But you can't keep the fractions at the end, remember, of this standard form? Okay. So we'd have y equals 2/5 x. If you do 8/5 plus 3, I think you get 23/5. Someone check that. This would be 15/5 x, which will be 23 fifths. Okay. Then to standard form, you would have to subtract this over to the other side. Boy, I made an ugly one as an example, didn't I? Okay, can't have a negative out front, so you got to change all the signs, but we also need to get rid of the 5. So we could multiply by a -5. It's not this ugly on the quiz, I don't think. -5 times -2 is 10, divided by 5 would be a 2x. Do I write plus y? You're so close. Don't write plus y. You got to distribute that guy. And then over here, when you multiply by a -5, you get a -23. Is it okay that there's some negatives?
Yeah.
As long as it's not on that A. I don't think it's that ugly on the quiz. But there is one, it's the only one that has standard form. Everything from there on is a different form, like this slope intercept. How am I doing? How much time do I have? Not much? Okay, so I got time. You want to do parallel, perpendicular, either one?
The parallel one's weird because I think they messed up writing that one.
You would get the y by itself, it'd be a -2. You would keep the -2, right?
Yeah. And you
Y minus 5 equals -2x minus -3 would be +3. Yes, I always start with point slope form. Because I need the slope intercept form at the end, which just means I need to get the y by itself. So I'm going to add 5 over here. And I got -2x minus 1.
Oh, I thought the actually the middle was on the other one because the parallel is like the line
Came out the
parallel
same line or something. Yeah, that I know I messed up. It was on like the
yeah,
review
okay,
for the
that
other
was
quiz.
last one,
Yes.
not this one. Okay.
Do you want me to just start this one? Remember, you would have to subtract the x to the other side. Divide everything by -4, and that makes the slope of this line what?
Positive 1/4.
Yes. The slope here is 1/4, which means the perpendicular slope we want is -4. And then my suggestion would be that you go back up here and use x1, y1, and point slope. Y minus -7, -4, x minus 1, and then you just distribute and get the y by itself, okay? Everybody okay with those? What about given 2 points? Do you want me to do the next one or the word problem?
I like the next the point one, 2 points one, because it says you have to put into standard form.
Okay. It doesn't say that on the quiz, but we can definitely practice. What's the thing everybody does wrong? It's initial finding the slope, right? It's got to be changing y over changing x. Please remember to put the y's on the top.
I remember putting x and y on the quiz for some reason.
So I'm getting 5 over -3. Is anybody checking that? Okay. So then we would need to do, I don't know, I'm going to pick this one. So it'll be y minus 2 equals a -5/3 x minus a -3, which will be +3. If I distribute, -5/3 x, -5 divided by 3 times 3 is just a -5. Then I just need to add the, okay. On the quiz, I would just need to add the 2. But this one does say standard form, so good practice. How would we get it to standard form? Add the 5/3 x. And then?
No fraction, so multiply by 3.
5x plus 3y equals -9. Did someone else get a different answer? Did I mess something up? Okay. We have time to do the word problem still? Okay. On the quiz, I actually wrote down the ordered pairs for you. I said, hint, use this ordered pair and this ordered pair. The reason I did that is because the one we just did where I gave you 2 ordered pairs, I didn't put that one on there. Remember when we took this section the first time, there was like 5 questions? It's shorter this time, okay? All right, if I do the slope, I'm actually going to subtract the y's in this order just because it's easier in my head over the x's. Doesn't matter as long as you do them in the same order. And you put the y's on the top.
38.25 is what I got.
Up here?
Yeah.
38?
I'll
I think you're right. Because I know when you divide, I think it comes out 25.5.
yes, it does come up.
So I found the slope and I got 25.5. And it was y's per x, which is dollars per hour. I didn't even ask you for that on the quiz. I just said go directly to the equation, but you had to find the slope anyway. Then if I use this point, I'd have y minus 233. Can you guys do this on your own? Distribute and get the y by itself? $153 maybe? And when you add it over there, it's 80. And then put the 1.5 in. Okay, which section are you most worried about personally?
I am ready.
All right, I'm gonna stop my recording because now